All right, so we'll get started. Any questions before we start? So this activity that we are doing, this is under the exam one review activities. Okay, there are a bunch of practice activities, study guide, everything there. So this one is also under the exam one review materials. And also I'm recording this lecture. So on that I will also add the link under the same place. All right, so exam one review. So what I want to do here is actually talk about how the blood flow of heart, okay? We know how blood flow from which chamber to which vein to which artery where it's flowing, which valve. And then I'm going to link that with the electrical event, which is the background activity going on, and then the final mechanical activity that it really pumps the blood, right? So the blood doesn't flow on its own. There is an electrical activity that stimulates it from the background, and then the mechanical activity that actually really does the mechanics, the function. All right. So tell me first, what are these arrows telling you? What are the blue arrows telling you? The blue arrows is telling the deoxygenated blood from the vena cava draining into which chamber? Right atrium, right. What about the red arrow? Going to the pulmonary veins, and where this blood will drain into which chamber? The left atrium. So basically we are now at a point in heart where blood is totally in the atrium. Doesn't matter what type of blood, but it's in the atrium. So let's see that. What is the background electrical event behind this? Basically, what does the electrical event do? It sets the pulse, sets the background for the heart to beat, right? And who sets the pulse or helps the cardiac muscles to contract? So the electrical event here is generated, or the impulse is generated into this node, which is the SA node, which is on the top of the right atrial wall, right? On the top of the right atrial wall that we have. So from here the SA node actually generates the impulse, okay, and provided the heart wants to contract, and then that impulse actually spreads across. So like you see here, that is spreading across the atria, right? It is spreading across the atria, and then it is going into the AV node, atrioventricular node or AV node, okay, that holds the impulse for 0.1 second, and that allows the atrium to contract, because this impulse actually is generating depolarization. Therefore, whenever atrium is in depolarized state, that causes the P wave, and that depolarization causes the P wave, as well as the atrium. In the mechanical event, this is when the blood starts pushing out of the atrium. That means that the atrium is contracting. Does it make sense? When blood is in the atrium, where the impulse starts from the SA node, that's when the atrium really starts doing something. It spreads all across the atrium. Then when it is entirely spread across the atrium, we see the P wave during this state, because this is when the atrium is depolarizing, and depolarizing means it is contracting. And what is the contraction event called in mechanical terms? Systole. So this is when atrium will also go through systole. So blood will start pushing out from the atrium to the ventricle. Now in the next phase, the blood is flowing into the ventricles, right? Through the valves. I'm not getting into the valves, I know you know that. It's going into the ventricles. So now blood is in the ventricle. So now it's time for the ventricles to act. So what will be the electrical events behind that? So previously the impulse was on the AV node. Now it was delayed there for 0.1 seconds, making sure that the atrium has contracted. Now the impulse will come into number 3, which is this AV bundles over here, right? and so basically it is trying to spread around the impulse. It will go straight down towards this left and right branches and will get into towards the apex of the heart through these two branches going to the apex of the heart. Like you can see on this top figure how is the atrium, the impulse is like spreading across, right? It is going from the top and spreading around the entire apex. So this is when the ventricle starts to depolarize again, okay, and that is will give us the QRS complex, okay, QRS complex. Now this is when the ventricle is yet like the pressure is still low because blood is still flowing in the ventricle. It's not yet totally have contraction, but just ventricle has started to contract. It's not yet done. So we have just generated the QRS wave, but it's still contracting. Ventricle is still receiving the blood. When the impulse flows into the side walls over here, into the subcardial conducting network or the Purkinje fibers on the both side of the ventricles, both right and left side, basically all these myocardial walls, this is when actually we finish the depolarization. So if we finish the depolarization, then we also finish which mechanical event? Is it systole or diastole? Systole. That means ventricle's contraction is almost done, right? So the rising ventricular pressure, ventricular pressure is really high at this point. When the blood has already flown into the ventricles, the AV valves close. There is a small time gap before which the AV valve, when the AV valve is closed, the SL valve is also not open. So the whole blood, you can see in the yellow figure, the top figure, the entire blood is still in the ventricle, okay? So therefore that phase is called as the isovolumetric contraction. It's a split second period when the ventricle is completely closed. The volume is constant. We call that as isometric contraction phase. So this is when also the systole is happening over in the ventricles. Now basically the ventricle is fully ready to pump out the blood, right? And after the split second is over, the SL valves will open and the ventricle will basically finish its systole, pump out the blood, okay? Now we reach the ventricular repolarization begins because the ventricle is releasing the blood. So we are reaching towards the T phase and we will get into the T phase, means ventricular repolarization is beginning. When we are finishing T wave, the repolarization is done. That means that the entire ventricle is actually totally repolarized. T wave means the ventricles are beginning to repolarize, and the T when done means it is done. So what is the mechanical event here? The ventricles are relaxing, generating T wave, and basically the the ventricular pressure drops, causing the backflow, but at this time the SL valves also closes, making sure everything is like out of the valve, and this is called also as isovolumetric relaxation period, because this is when the ventricle is actually in diastolic situation, not systole anymore. All right, so basically it's pumping out and relaxing. Now whenever we are in repolarized state, that means we are in diastolic situation. Is this making sense or made sense? All right, so let me quickly go through some questions and then we can move on. All right, let's start from the beginning. So when blood is here in the atrium here, so someone summarize me and tell me the electrical and mechanical events over here. So the blood is in the atrium. So someone summarize me and tell me what's the background electrical activity and how does it is related to the mechanical event. Take your time, but you will summarize, not I will. You can discuss, use this as a discussion question, discuss with your Classmates, see your notes and tell me. You will do the summarization. I will not do it. All right, who's ready to go? Let's break it into two parts. Someone tell me what when blood is in the atrium, what is happening as far as the electrical events are concerned. What is the electrical event behind that? That will actually help the atrium to contract. What will it do?
It sets off the impulse that activates the beginning of depolarization in the atrium.
Okay, and from SA node, SA node sets up the impulse to which the cardiac cycle will actually happen, right? And where will that spread into? To the AV node, right? From the atrium to the AV node. So now the atrium is ready to get depolarized, right? Or it will depolarize. The wave that we generate is which wave in ECG pattern? P wave. And what is the mechanical event here, therefore? For which chamber? Both chambers will systole, means they will contract, push the blood out. So same thing when the blood is now in the ventricle. So now what happens? Now tell me what's the electrical event is happening. Just to start it, so now it's turn for the ventricle to systole, to go for depolarization. So now how the electrical impulse flows from the AV node to the AV bundle. From there it goes to the bundle branches towards the apex, right? And that's how we start generating the QRS complex. Now finally it goes on both the sides of the ventricle, which is these fibers on the two sides here, Purkinje fiber. So basically the entire impulse is in the ventricles. So what will happen to the ventricles? They will completely depolarize or repolarize. And the mechanical event therefore is the complete systole. So blood will push out. What is the phase? How will you, if I ask you what is the isovolumetric contraction phase, how will you define that? It's a very small time before the systole have actually happened. So what is the phase? All valves are closed and the volume is constant in the ventricle. After that the systole will finish up. Now then when the blood is flowing out of the heart, so now the ventricle goes into which state? Repolarization. The wave we generate is T, and this is also called as the isovolumetric relaxation, because the ventricles are relaxing. All right, so this is the key for heart. So there are a couple of uh, there are two types of cells that resides in the SA node, AV node, that sets up the contractile muscles, that sets up the impulse. There are other cells which is actually in the myocardium that actually contracts. You know that's two different types of cells and there are two different patterns of action potential. Two patterns mean they use two different types of ions. Okay, so one uses more sodium, one uses more calcium, and that is not complicated. So this is the part that is more complicated. You need to know what are the two types of cells that's hard there. One sets up the impulse, one contracts, and then the two types of action potential. That's all you need to add into this. Other than this, these three events are all linked together. Is it making more sense now in heart? So this is the most critical part. That's why I wanted to do this activity. Now I will post this in under the review activity, and like I said, but before we move on, a couple of you asked me about varicosities, which is the case study for the blood vessels. Have any of you worked on that? Know what is varicosity? So let me give you a quick, I'm not going to tell you all the answers, but I'm just telling you what varicosity is. Varicosity is when a person is standing, like keep standing for a long time, like have a standing job. It puts a lot of pressure on the veins, especially on the lower extremity vein. Okay, the veins becomes dilated, inflated, it becomes kind of curled up together, and you can sort of see that from the skin, from the top of the skin. Commonly it can happen with the saphenous vein, okay, because it's one of the vein that superficially we can see that actually in the saphenous vein pretty easily. All right, so that's varicosity, and that's your last chapter blood vessels case study. Okay, there are other related questions, but this is the summary of that whole thing. All right, so I will going to put this review in there in the under the review activities. There is another set of PowerPoint that's in there that says heart practice, and also there is already there is a small recorded video there with that practice. It's so use that as well. So you use all of this. So on Wednesday when we come back, we will actually do a whole set of review activity with all the chapters, and also I will go through couple of more answers with the case studies. All right.